Hi everybody, and welcome to my first of 3 videos about the Canon EOS-1 V. There is so much to this camera that we've got to do a third video specific to all of the features and functions hidden under here, which we'll see that little flap better in a minute or two. This is a very complex camera, so let's just jump right into it. This is a 35mm film interchangeable lens SLR, and what that means is that the lenses can be taken off and a new one can be put on. Single lens reflex means it has one lens and that the light coming through the lens makes it into the eyepiece that you look through when you're using the camera, and that the reflex refers to the mirror in this that redirects the light from the lens to the eyepiece, and then it gets out of the way when the light goes through the lens to the film plane. This camera has a multi-mode meter, and we'll talk a little bit more about the meter later in either this video or the second. It has shutter speeds from 30 seconds up to 1/8,000th of a second, which is really good for freezing action. The viewfinder magnification through the viewfinder is 72% magnification, and the frame coverage is 100%. When looking through the viewfinder here, you have magnification of 72%, meaning that what you see is 72% of the size that it will be on the actual film, with 100% frame coverage, meaning that what you see through here is exactly what is going to make it onto the film. When looking through the eyepiece, the focusing screen that's in here, which is a little piece that we'll see in the second video, we'll talk about how to change them, is interchangeable. The standard is the basic AF autofocus point screen that shows your autofocus points. The last thing about this camera is that it has a blisteringly fast flash sync of 1/250th of a second. So let's talk a bit about this camera's history. The target market for this camera was the professional. It's beyond really what was intended or useful to the advanced hobbyist or enthusiast. It has gobs and gobs of advanced features. You'll hear in my voiceover, I was so intimidated by this camera, by everything it can do. I got it, and it has got almost as many features as a digital SLR without the convenience of an interface that's logical or intuitive. It has all of this information and doesn't really give it to you in a good way. If you're going to make many changes to this camera, you might as well have your manual next to you the whole time. But it's got tons of advanced features. It's spec'd out with a lot of capabilities that most people won't know how to use. That's not meant to be derisive or anything like that. It's just a fact. There's so much this camera can do that many of its functions won't ever be used, or would be used by a small percentage of people who use it. It is the most ideal film camera for sports action ever made, hands down. Yes, the Alpha 9 has a faster short shutter speed of 1/12,000th of a second, but this camera with the high-speed battery grip, which I don't have attached to it, can shoot a faster frame rate than any 35mm still camera ever made. And that's exceptional for sports photography. This camera was designed to have only the required features and none of the extraneous stuff preferred by hobbyists. That said, this has so much stuff, I can't believe that it has only the required features in it. But it doesn't have a lot of the interface doodads and gimmicks that entry-level and hobbyist type cameras have. It is everything that it has will serve a purpose, just not to everyone. The 1V was produced by Canon in Japan from 2000 until 2012, but it was phased out in some markets starting in 2008. Now, what I couldn't find out was if 2012 was when it went out of production or when it was no longer available for sale as a new product, but certainly in 2008 it began disappearing from markets in, I believe it was Europe and the US. This was preceded directly by the Canon T90, the last of the FD, well, not directly. The EOS-1 family was preceded by the Canon T90. There were previous EOS-1s before the V. This was because it had a 12-year production run, or nearly 12-year production run. It was concurrent with a lot of different bodies, film and digital, including the Elan 7, the Rebel 2000, the Rebel TI, the EOS-1 D, and just myriad others. Canon makes so many different camera bodies, it's hard to keep track of them. And this was followed by the EOS-1 D. At some point, the EOS-1 D started taking over for this as the professional level Canon body. If you have your EOS-1 V, we're going to take a look at the different features of the camera. We're going to start at the top and move around the camera and see what all of the different buttons and things are. In the second video, we're going to talk about what they do, except for the custom functions menu, which we'll cover in the third video. That is exactly what the third video is going to be about. So here on either side, we have the strap lugs for attaching the strap. We have here the control buttons, therefore the flash and metering mode here. ISO when you push both of these, autofocus, bracketing mode here, and your camera's drive mode when you push these two. So what you can see is that there's an indicator here, ISO, with the two triangles. That means if you push both of these buttons, it will take you to the ISO menu. That's how to read that. On the side of the prism here, we have a circle with a line through it. That's your film plane indicator. Here is your flash hot shoe. It's technically on top, but we'll see it when we get to the back, this little lever right here. This is your LCD illumination, and you can see when you push the button that the LCD glows blue. It's a very actually pleasant blue. It's not distracting. They did a really good job of picking an LCD glow color for this camera. Next to it, we have the exposure compensation button right here. This is the, here FEL, this is the FE lock multi-spot metering button. Next to it, we have the main dial. That's this little rotating dial right here. Let me turn this off before I start messing with it. In front of the main dial is this button right here. This is the shutter release. Here we have the LCD screen, and then we have two symbols for buttons that we're going to talk about on the back in just a moment. Here's the camera's front, and what we have on the front, this button right here is your depth of field preview button. So when you push this, it will shut the aperture blades on the lens so that through the viewfinder you can see approximately what your depth of field will be. Here this is the lens mount with electronic contacts in the back of it. This red dot is your lens mount index, and when we try to successfully or not mount a lens on this camera in the second video, we'll see what that's for. This is the lens locking pin, and you can see it gets retracted into the body when we push the lens release right here. And then there's a little clip right here. Don't mess with it yet. We'll see it in the second video. This is what you need to do to access your focusing screen so you can swap out your focusing screen. So here we are on when you're holding it, the side of the camera that goes in your left hand. This is your, come on, flash PC port cover, and I'll just unscrew it. And you can see that it covers the flash PC port, just the standard PC port. Come back here. And it's nice that they have a screw-in cover so that it keeps dirt out and other weather and doesn't short out your camera or ruin your PC connection. Because for a professional grade camera, being able to connect your flash to a PC port is much more important than being able to connect it to a hot shoe. This is your camera's data cable. And the data cable allows you to connect the camera to your computer. This camera has some onboard memory, so it will store EXIF data for the images that you take. And if you use a software like Meta 35 or the Canon brand software, I've been using Meta 35. The guys at Meta 35 loaned me this camera, full disclosure, and have asked me to do a review of their software, and that's going to come later in a separate video. But this camera pairs up really nicely with Meta 35's software. Here is the film back release. This button on top is the unlock, and then the slide is the actual release. Good thing I didn't have film in there, I suppose. This side is the side that you would hold in your right hand when you grip the camera. Doesn't appear that there's all that much on it, but if you lift up this flap, which has a magnet on it to hold it shut, which is pretty nice, you'll see 4 buttons. Clear, multiple exposure, multifunction, MFN is multifunction, and CFN is custom function. Those are the 4 buttons under this flap. Custom function and multifunction are what we're going to talk about in the 3rd video. Clear clears out your camera's memory and settings, and then multiple exposure is it's multiple exposures. That's just, we'll see how to do that in the 2nd video when we talk about taking multiple exposures with this camera. On the back of the camera here, first thing we have is the film type window. That's a window that lets you look through to see the film type and frame count quantity printed on your film's cassette. This is tinted glass. In addition, when we see inside, you'll see some foam around it. They did a very good job when they made this of making sure that no light could get in to fog your film. Below it, we have the serial number. On, off, and beep button. Beep is on, but it makes noise. Manual film rewind if you don't have the camera set to automatically rewind film, or if you want to rewind it in the middle of a roll. This is the quick control dial, and it's a bit of a counterintuitive interface. Honestly, it is. But you can change some settings that dictate how this is used to make it a little bit more user-friendly. That said, I actually have this set up so I don't even use that thing. It's just it's kind of gimmicky. This isn't a difficult place to get to, and it just, you have to turn it on, and it's just, anyway. This is the on-off button for your dial. Here we have the viewfinder, and we'll take off the viewfinder cover. You take off the viewfinder cover by just squeezing the sides where there's a little bit of a printed thing, embossed, whatever the word is. This is your diopter adjuster, this little dial, so you can change your diopter setting. If you have a very weak glasses prescription, you can adjust it so that it's within your, so you don't need to wear your glasses when you have your when you're looking through the camera. This, as we saw, this little lever, this is a shade that blocks out the viewfinder, and that's really good for doing things like overnight photography, where you don't want any light to get in through the viewfinder and fog your film, especially if you're going to do multi-hour exposures. It's good for macro photography because macro photos typically have slightly longer exposures. It's also just good if you're doing something where you don't need to look through the camera, because extraneous light coming into the viewfinder can adjust the way that the light meter dictates the exposure. Here, this is the assist button right here. This one underneath the asterisk, so in the middle, is the auto exposure lock button. And this one over here on the end, underneath the checkerboard icon, is your focus point selector button. On the camera's bottom, we have a few things. We have here the power drive booster mechanical contact. So if you take this off, you can get to the mechanical connection that the power winder uses. Here we have an alignment pin. This is your tripod bushing, your CE stamp and made in Japan right here. Then over here we have the battery chamber screw, and this is to release basically the whole grip so you can access the chamber. And in the second video, we'll take a look at that when I show you how to change the battery on this camera. Here we are inside of the camera, and you get inside of the camera by pushing down on this button on the side and then popping the back open by sliding this lever towards the bottom of the camera. This is the film cassette chamber. This is where you would put the film when you load it. There's a number you might be able to see on the inside. That's a date code that you can look up online that tells you when your camera was made. There's a bunch of gold contacts in there. Those gold contacts are DX code readers. Modern film has a black and silver checkerboard, and you load it in here, and then that camera knows what kind of film it is, the exposure compensation amount, the number of frames on the roll, and the speed. Now this camera looks at the number of frames on the roll, and it will only shoot 24 or 36 exposures only. So what happens if you're using a 12 exposure roll? Well, I got some rolls that were 18 exposures, and they were DX coded for 36. This camera stopped at 15 when it reached the end of the film, because it was actually slightly short. So when it hits resistance and can't advance any further, it won't, so that it doesn't damage your film or the camera's internal workings. This right here is the film guide pin. The bottom of the film runs along it, and that helps keep the film moving through the camera in line. The silver rails, the outside and inside rails, are your film guide rails. The outer two, the film's top and bottom edges, rest against that so that it doesn't move up and down as it travels. The inner two, the film's sprockets, rest on that, and then we'll see the pressure plate in just a minute. The pressure plate and these rails keep the film sandwiched flat so that it moves through the camera flat on plane, and the lens focuses the image where it needs to focus it. Here we have the shutter curtains. You can see there's a film guide roller over here that just helps keep the film rolling smoothly. Then we have the film take-up spool, which the film wraps around. This orange dot right here, that's your film guide index, and when we load film, and I show you how to do that in the second video, we'll see this, and what that does is give you the point where you need to pull the leader out from the film and connect it and leave it so that the camera can take it up. This here is your electrical contacts for when you put different types of film backs on the camera. Here are the electrical contacts on this film back that communicate the type of film back it is to the camera. Here is a film tension roller to help keep the film traveling through there and help it stay properly tensed. Some things look like additional rollers. Oh yeah, those little rollers, those are cute. Or smooth things at any rate. They do something for helping to keep the film moving. They look like they have little sprocket grabbers. So they probably, my guess is that these lock into the film sprockets to provide proper tension, so that film is plastic, so it develops a memory from being coiled up. So these I'm guessing hold the film in place so that it doesn't get pulled back into the cassette from the memory that builds up and cause your frames to overlap. This is the film pressure plate. This is what sandwiches up against those silver guide rails we saw earlier to help keep your film flat on plane. Here's a film cassette retention spring, which helps, in conjunction with this spring right here, keep your film cassette properly positioned in the film back so that the film can come off of it smoothly. And there's another cassette spring another film cassette spring in the cassette chamber that helps with that. You know, when you're pulling film through at, I think it's 10.5 frames per second with the high-speed booster, it's got to be perfectly lined up or it's going to jam and ruin the camera. Certainly all the film. So there's a lot of extra hardware in here to keep the film properly lined up so that it can move through the camera quickly and not bind. And then of course here we have a foam piece around the window so that no light that comes into the window can fog the film. The Canon EOS-1 V has the fastest moving mirror of any 35mm camera ever made. The Alpha 9 by Minolta had a faster shutter and faster X-sync speed, but when you have your camera, right, you've got your film right here, and then there's a mirror here that directs the light coming from the lens up to the prism. It has to, I can't really bend my arm. Well, we'll do it anyway. The mirror has to move up to expose the film, so the shutter can open and expose the film to the light from the lens, and then it comes back in place. The movement of this camera's mirror is faster than any other camera ever made. It's capable of shooting 10, maybe 10.5 frames per second with the PBE2 power booster, and that's what gives it the high speed designation. What that means is that you can burn through a 36 exposure roll of film in 3.6 seconds, which is pretty incredible to think about. I really wish I had the power booster. I would love to know what that sounds like. I would waste a roll of film just to know what that sounds like. Without the power booster, however, this camera can still take a respectable 4 frames per second with its advance. That's still really good for a 35mm film camera. The Canon EOS-1 V is not, however, without its drawbacks. It will only shoot 24 or 36 exposures unless you run out of film before that. So that means that if you wind your own film and you put 45 exposures on, you're going to have 9 that are wasted at the end. So if you wind your own film, only wind it at 24 or 36, don't wind it at 27 or 40. And the number of frames it shoots is based on what the DX code says. So if you use DX coded reloadable film cassettes and it says 24 in that reloadable film cassette, whether you put 36 frames or 40 frames on that cassette, the camera will only shoot 24. So if you have DX coded reloadable film cassettes, the best thing to do is cover the DX code with electrician's tape and manually enter the ISO when you load it, and just let the camera shoot until it hits 36 exposures. There's a lot to love about the Canon EOS-1 V. Build quality, shutter speed, frame rate, metering quality, and features. The EOS-1 V is packed with features like my grocery basket the day after my paycheck clears. And like my grocery basket, it's nearly impossible to reach into it and quickly grab the thing that I want. So while this camera has a lot to love, ease of use is not one of those things. My loaner EOS-1 V arrived the same day as the Minolta Alpha 9 that I bought for myself. These are two cameras that competed and had similar specs and capabilities. But the difference between them is astounding. The EOS-1 V hides features and functions behind button press combinations and secret coded menu functions. The Minolta displays functions in the open and in a way that's very easy to access. The Minolta was designed with the user in mind. The EOS-1 V was clearly designed with the software engineer in mind. With the Minolta Alpha 9, a skilled photographer could change most of the camera's settings and all of the shooting settings without removing their eye from the viewfinder. In stark contrast, the EOS-1 V's biggest flaw is that any settings change, aside from whatever you have programmed the command wheel to do, requires that you drop the camera, figure out which buttons to push them, adjust some dials to pick a thing, and then go back to shooting. Meanwhile, you missed 10 great photo opportunities. Awesome. And that was really my narrative with the EOS-1 V. I kept missing shots because I needed to make a functional change and had to always bring the camera away from my eye to do it. Without exception, this was the worst camera I have ever used to take sports photos. The EOS-1 V was daunting, complex, confusing, and difficult to use, I felt, for the first week that I had it, and in that span of time I took 16 rolls of film, completely intimidated. I was totally lost using this camera for the first day, and I can't say, if I'm honest, that the feeling of being lost when using the EOS-1 V ever fully went away. The EOS-1 V, to its credit, has about as many features as a modern DSLR. To its detriment, it lacks any sort of logical interface. Anytime I wanted to change a functional setting on the 1V, I needed to refer to the manual. The manual is a huge Byzantine and complex book. If I were to make a penitentiary prisoner in the US read the manual, it would be considered cruel and unusual punishment. So this camera is not for everyone. Its interface is complex, its ergonomics bizarre, its bells and whistles all slightly off-key. But looking at the specs, it's a fantastic camera. The 1V throws more at the users than some DSLRs in 2015. In terms of capabilities, the EOS-1 V outpaces all but a very small number of DSLRs that are available today on the used market. If you bought this camera and decided to use it for the rest of your life, you would want for nothing but a logical and intuitive interface. Lest you think that I hated this camera, I did not. I would recommend it to very, very few people, but it is one of the most incredible pieces of photographic equipment I've ever used. I appreciate the many, many tens of thousands of hours that clearly went into engineering this camera's performance. The Canon EOS-1 V was the last of the professional-grade film cameras that Canon released, and Canon went out on a high note. Personally, I think that the A1 will always be the best film camera that they made, but I would fault no one for asserting that the EOS-1 V was the best. Looking at the specs, it reads like a fanboy's wildest and most gonzo wish list, but it's sort of like an aloof professional athlete who can do anything on the field but can't coach a lesser athlete. And in a past life, I knew some pro athletes. The best players are often the worst coaches. And for all the complexity and doodads and wazoos that the EOS-1 V throws at the users, none of them help any except specialist photographers obtain better shots. In fact, quite the opposite. I missed almost as many good photos as I took at my friends' softball games because I couldn't switch modes, change a setting, or adjust a control without lowering the camera, figuring out which multi-button combination to push, pushing them, adjusting some wheels, and then getting back into the viewfinder, by which point the play I was preparing to photograph came and went while my focus was on top of the EOS-1 V. Were I creating a team to play sports for profit, I'd want a pro athlete on my team. Were I creating a team to play pickup softball with, I'd want my friends on my team. And that's my take on cameras, too. I don't want a pro athlete on my team when I'm just having fun. I want a camera around my neck that is fun, accessible, enjoyable, and easy to use, and, for me, that's just not the EOS-1 V. A couple things not to do with this camera. Do not touch the shutter. We saw the shutter inside of it, inside the back. Don't touch the shutter. If your finger oils get onto the camera's shutter mechanism, that's a really good way to cause havoc with it, especially with a high spec, a very precise shutter like this one. Don't touch the mirror inside right there, because your finger oils, if they get on the mirror, it's a silver surface coated mirror, will cause the silver to tarnish, which will throw off your viewfinder image, potentially your metering, and just make it harder to use the camera accurately. It will almost definitely throw off your autofocus. Do not leave your camera or your lenses in your car. That's a really good way to get heat damage. Heat causes the oils in the camera and the lubricants that keep it moving smoothly to get really thin and run all over the place where they shouldn't. And then when the camera's not hot, those oils go back to being the proper consistency and they're in the wrong place and they muck up the works. Likewise, on your lenses, the oils can get onto your shutter blade if they get really, your aperture blades if they get really thin, and can completely screw up the way that your lens aperture works. Likewise, if it's really cold, the oils will freeze, which causes them to break down and become gummy, and then they won't work properly either. Do not store your Canon EOS-1 V in a plastic bag or box unless you have a really good desiccant in it, but as a general rule, don't store your cameras in plastic containers because moisture will get into the plastic, and moisture loves to eat the coatings on your lenses, the material on your camera's grips, and just give your cameras a really terrible, mildewy, funky smell. If you've ever bought a camera off eBay and opened it up and found out that it had mildew under the leather and it had just been sitting for a while, that is the worst box you can open. Also, don't let this camera get wet. It has some weather sealing, but it's not like modern. It's not as good as modern weather sealing. It's still really good, but don't dump it in the water. Don't be like, hey, I'm gonna take it swimming with me. But if you're out in the rain and it starts to mist, or if you're out in the out on a softball or baseball field and a bunch of dust comes up and blows over your camera, it's not gonna ruin your camera or get into your camera's works like it might with other cameras. And just remember, your camera, especially with a camera like the EOS-1 V, is a precision tool. And as long as you handle it with care and respect, and as long as you take care of it, your camera will take care of you. So this was my first of 3 videos, very exhaustive videos on the Canon EOS-1 V. If this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track. If you'd like to know when I have more camera videos, more film photography, digital photography, how-to type videos, please subscribe, and then you'll get notification of when I release new content. If you have questions or suggestions, please leave those in the comments section. And I'm pretty good about getting back to you. But make sure when you leave a comment that you have your settings set so that I can respond to them. If I can't respond to your comment, it makes it really difficult for me to answer your question. And if you are an amateur photographer and you've taken pictures with the EOS-1 V that you'd like to share, feel free to post a link to those in the comments section. And one last thing before we go, thank you guys for watching and take great photos.